Welcome back. This is Fady from Heartbeat Productions, and welcome to the control room. One of the things I got asked about the most was this wall back there. What did I do to build this, and how did I build it? In today's video, I want to walk you guys through step by step of what I did to build that wall back there, and the reasons why I did it, and is it really worth it? Did it really make a difference in my room or not? And just a lot of the practical steps of how to do it. I'm gonna include all links of material and stuff that I've used down in the description as well. And I hope that helps you if you're considering building something similar to this in your studio. Let's start with why before how. Why did I build this, and is it worth the trouble? Does it really make a difference or not? As you guys can see, I have the Barefoot MM27 speakers. I have a set of them back there, and those are 3.5 way speakers. So each speaker has two subwoofers that are 10-inch, and then it has two mid drivers and a tweeter. And so basically you got four 10-inch subwoofers in this room. I've had those speakers in my previous room as well. They're absolutely incredible. I'm making a separate video just to talk about them, pros and cons, and what I love about them. But also one of the things about them that are crucial is that they will expose your room because they're very, very powerful. And if you don't have a well-treated room, you're gonna end up with so many spikes, and specifically in the low end. Low-end frequencies are way longer, so it requires a whole lot more soundproofing than the high-end frequencies because they're a lot shorter wavelength. Without getting into physics and without getting into physics and details, what does that wall do back there? So that wood that you guys are seeing is actually not on the sheetrock. I had to build an entire frame that is 6-inch thick, and then it's almost like building a panel, a 6-inch thick panel that has in it 2 layers of fiberglass, each is 3-inch thick. You can use the Own Corning's ones, or you can use the Safe and Sound one. I use the Own Corning's one. I like it more because it's a little bit more dense. So it's better. I like it more. Anyways, if I would have built that entire wall, which was my initial plan, to be basically a floor-to-ceiling panel covers the whole room. Well, the problem here is that, well, great, it was going to be very, very well soundproofed, but it will dim that room significantly and kill tons of my high mids and highs. The room is going to be too dark. I do a lot of mixing and mashing in this room, so I want to obviously have a flat room, but I also want the room to still have some liveliness to it. I don't want it to be so dim and dead. So doing it that way will create that dead sound in the room. Well, that's great if I'm doing like a vocal booth, but it's not great for a mixing room. So the alternative is to use this wood slats, and I used 1x2s, and then you run it through the whole wall except for the corners. And the idea is as the sound goes in between that wood, so some of the sound goes in between the wood to the inside of the panels to get absorbed inside, and some of it gets diffused and dissipated through the wood and reflects back a little bit. And then that way you kind of create that little bit of diffusion to your room, and then it is not super dead. It still have a little bit of liveliness to it. But on the corners, I want it to really take care of the low end because that's where a lot of the bass gets trapped. So that's why I call it bass traps. So I didn't do the diffusions on the corners. And you guys can see back there, the corners are just black fabric. Did it make a difference to my room? Absolutely. Well, obviously there's the visual difference, which it looks great, and I just like how it looks. It looks really cool, and has that really sweet vibe to it, which is amazing, but it's not really what I built it for. It's mostly about the sound, and that's what I care about the most. I have noticed that my Barefoots now are a lot more balanced in the room when I did measurements before and after. And especially in the low end, was significantly better. I used to have some dips at around 100, and I used to have some massive spikes around 42-ish, which is where like some of your subs are. Also, even my mids and my high mids were a lot more balanced and closer to flat than what it used to be without that wall. I still do fine tuning through my M908 monitor controller, and that's how I get like the fine adjustments before for all my audio before it hits the speaker to get the really flat response. But even without it, it's really close that it sounds great. Okay, great. Now let's dig into how to build it. And is it really hard or is it easy? I'll walk you guys through the steps. When we were building, I asked the contractors to just finish the room as normal. Just put sheetrock, paint it, and put trim on the floor, do everything as they normally do it. And this room was completely finished, floors, ceilings, and that back wall was just a normal white sheetrocked wall that is sanded and then painted, was white color. And then what I did is I built a frame, and then that is 6-inch thick. And then instead of building one massive frame, which would be really, really hard, I ended up breaking that wall into 4 pieces. You have a corner trap on each side that is about 20-inch by 20-inch deep. Those are the black ones on the far sides. And in the middle part, it was close to, I think it was about 3.5 feet each. So I built 2 little segments. That's where you see the wood slats. And then each is about 3.5 feet. My room is almost 12 feet wide by 21 feet long. So I built 4 sections, and then I ended up putting the insulation inside each section individually. Now, when you're building a frame that tall, especially if you're not going to build that frame within your wall or like screwing it to the wall, you run into the problem. If you use the normal 2x4s, they're not like super straight. You're gonna get all the bowing and the curves in them and stuff like that, which I don't really like, and that caused me a lot of trouble. So one thing that I've learned, which was actually a little bit cheaper and easier to use, I used MDF strips that are either 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch if they want them to be a little bit more stiff. And then MDF is very, very straight. You don't have any bowing in it or anything. So I built the frame actually with MDF. You can also do with a higher quality wood, but it obviously increases your cost. MDF is significantly cheaper. So you could do either or. And I had a whole bunch of leftover wood from the project of building the studio. So I kind of mixed and matched between both of them. So I built the frame, and I took my measurements from floor all the way up to ceiling, and I built my frame to be floor to ceiling. So both base traps and the 2 segments. And then I put the insulation inside. So I built it 6-inch thick, so that way it would take 2 layers of insulation inside. As I used, my insulation that I used was the 3-inch thick fiberglass. So that way it's completely full. And I obviously had to put some horizontal wood pieces to kind of hold it together and doesn't have it to be warped or anything or bent over, because it's really tall. This ceiling is about 10 feet tall, or 9 feet and 8 inches after floating the top ceiling. So it was pretty tall, so I wanted to make sure that everything is very, very straight. And then after doing this, I actually built them, not even in this room, I built all these 4 pieces in my garage, put all the insulation in it, and then I just got my black fabric, the same fabric that you guys see right here on my panels. This is just a felt black fabric that I bought from Joann's, and I'll include the link to it in my description. And then I just wrapped the whole frame with the black fabric, every one of the 4 separate, and I used a stapler gun with my air compressor, so boom, 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 really, really quick. I obviously stapled from the back so you don't see it, and just wrapped the whole thing. Now I have 4 pieces. Think of them as like 4 massive custom-made panels that takes your floor to ceiling. 2 are base traps and 2 are just panels that are 3.5 feet wide, and they're almost 10 feet tall. Now I had my wife actually helped me to carry them inside. They're not super heavy when you do one at a time. And then I put the base trap in the corner, and then the other base trap in the corner. So these were wedged against the corner, and then they stayed there for right now. Let me show you. So my goal is to build up here an entire second wall in front of the sheetrock wall, and then the whole second wall is going to be floor to ceiling. This is 6-inch thick, and it will have 2 layers of rock wool safe and sound. So it'll be 6" of insulation. And then I'll have a barrier over it to block the fiberglass from breathing it into the room. And then after the barrier, we'd have a black fabric to cover the whole thing. These are obviously base traps, and they are 20" deep. So they're 20 by 20, and I made them really deep because of the low end. I have the MM27s, barefoot speakers, which have a lot of low end in them, so I make sure that I get a really tight, clean low end in this room. And then now I came back with the 2 middle pieces, one at a time. And here's the trick, because once you put it up, it might stay, but once you start putting the wood slats on it, the whole thing will actually tip forward because you're having heavier weight on the front side because of the wood, so watch for this. So what I ended up doing, after I put the panel up, so there's still no wood slats at all, so I put 1 panel at a time, and then I came to the side of the panel and I used L-shape metal pieces from Lowe's, and I'll include the description for them in my comments below. And then I used some really heavy-duty wall anchors. I used the one that are like 250 pounds just to be safe. You know, I don't want any issues. And I anchored from the inside, L-shape, so part goes to the wood, and then the other part against the back wall, and then I screwed it into the wall, screwed it into the wood, so that way it holds the whole thing against the wall and it won't tip forward. And I did 2 on each side. Then I came back, placed the second, and then I did the same thing as well. And that way, now I have all my big panels anchored to the wall. Now the next step was I wanted to just kind of anchor everything together. So I ended up honestly doing, I just got those super thin metal strips that they look like tiny door hinges basically. They were really cheap. And then I got black so that way you don't really see it. And then I used those strips, one between the base trap and the first panel, one between first panel and second panel, one between second panel and the base traps on the other side. And then I just screwed them into them. So now all 4 pieces are glued together or like screwed together, so they're not gonna move, they're not gonna do anything, and they're also screwed to the wall, so they're not gonna tip over. Now, after doing this and everything is done and good to go, obviously, if you have any wall plugs behind this, you wanna make sure that you pass your cables through before you're done. I didn't really use any of the wall plugs behind this wall. I had dedicated wall plugs on both sides, so I didn't really have to use the ones behind this, so it didn't matter to me. And then after that, I just went and bought the wood slats. You can buy different kinds of woods, obviously, depending on what kind. The only thing I would say, don't go with the cheap standard one because they're gonna have a lot of bowing in them. So go with the little bit nicer ones. That way you make sure that it's more straight. It's not gonna be perfectly straight, but it's gonna be more straight than normal. And then I bought the 10-foot ones. Since my ceiling is 10 foot and I needed to cut about a few inches off it so I have the least amount of waste. I took my measurements, and what I did, so I used the 1x2 wood. So I would put 1 piece of wood and then turn the 1x2 the other way. So now I'm using the 1" side to create the spacing for me, and then put another one, create the spacing with the 1". And I took a measurement that way to see what is the average, what I need. So let's say I need like 24 wood pieces. So that's how I went and bought 24. And then I cut them all to the correct size. And then I stained them because I didn't want to go with the natural wood color. I wanted that, I used the early American because that's the color that I have for some of my panels in the ceiling. I like that color a lot. So I stained all of them first. So they're cut, they're ready to go. I stained them. And then now when I came back to start, don't start from the side. I started from the dead center. And the reason why I did is because I wanted to hide the junction between the middle 2 panels. And that's the really cool trick that you will, if you walked into this room, you'll never know that this wall in the back are actually completely two separate frames. Because I ran a wood strip right across the center where they meet together. And then I used just a brad nail to nail it in it. Make sure that that 1 piece is completely flat. So make sure you use a leveler, make sure it's completely flat all the way across. And then I would use a second piece of wood to make it as a spacer and set it on the 1" side and then wedge the next piece of wood next to it, butt it to it, so that way it keeps it straight. And then I would use a brad nail, and then I would just nail at the top because I have a frame at the top. I would nail it at the bottom. And then I had 2 middle horizontal lines that are running to hold that frame together, so I would brad nail on those 2 lines. And then I just started in the middle, and I kept going out to the sides, until my last piece covered the base traps, the junction line between the base trap and just my back panels. It didn't really take that long, to be honest. I would say the building the frame took maybe 2 to 3 hours to just build the frame. And then putting the insulation and wrapping it with the black fabric took about another couple hours, maybe 3 hours. Especially if you have a second hand to help you, because they're bigger in size, it'll be really easier to do. And then the base traps were the one that are a little bit tricky because you have to cut that triangle. So I took my measurements first of the wall, and I made scrap pieces and I put them on the floor of what the frame would be and what the base traps would be. And that way I didn't want to build something and I come back as like, oh, it's the wrong size, or there's some gaps, or it's not side to side. And I've done those mistakes before. So I learned, created scrap pieces, be like my outline. And once I got it all right, then I duplicated those scrap pieces to be the top of that frame. And then I connected top and bottom. And that's how I built my frame a lot easier. And then after that, obviously when you build a frame that tall, I would use both brad nails, but I would also use wood screws to hold it together. Because if you only hold that massive frame with brad nails, as you're trying to move it and bring it into the wall until you screw it to the wall, it actually might fall apart from you. So that's kind of an important tip. And then you got your wood wall. It looks amazing. It sounds amazing. It totally became the accent piece of my control room. It transformed the room, and it's worth the work, absolutely worth the work. If I would have had to buy this or get a company to do it, it would have cost obviously a fortune. And the way I did it, because they're 4 separate pieces, now if I one day decide to leave this house or sell it and walk away, I would basically remove the middle wood slab, that hole that is covering the junction line, and then remove these, the door hinge thing, the thin and long door hinge things that I use to screw both pieces together, and then unscrew that L-shaped metal bars from the wall and from the wood. And now I have all 4 pieces completely loose. I can take them out with me, and I can just patch the walls where those screws were. I have 4 screws in the wall, so it's not really that much work. And then boom, I can take it with me somewhere else, but I did not destroy anything in this room, and it's preserved. A lot of us have home studios, so that means your studio is in your house, is one of your bedrooms, whether it's in your basement or is in your loft or above your garage, and you obviously don't want to do something that is permanent, destroys the house, or even just for you to tear it apart. You'll have to tear the wall apart, and you have to do a lot of work afterwards to re-sheetrock or repaint or whatever. So doing it that way is the least amount of work up front, and it's also the least amount of work in the back end if you ever move and leave your house. And it's absolutely worth every penny in terms of look, sound, and especially if you do a lot of mixing and mastering in your studio, this becomes huge. Obviously, you would have to take some measurements before and after. So don't say, I'm gonna do this and my room is completely flat. I had to go through an extensive process of room measurements, while the room is empty, while the room there's some stuff in it, after putting my ceiling panels, after putting my wall panels. And then I also have my M908 monitor controller to do all the fine adjustments after all the room is done, to bring back my EQ to almost flat in this room for mixing and mastering. But it is a great start, and then it helps so much with the reflection in the room. It keeps your room alive, but it helps significantly with treatment for your room, and it looks so much better than just normal panels. I hope this really helped you, for all of you guys that are considering building something like this, or thinking like how to start or where to start, and is it even worth it or not. So if you have any comments, if you have any questions, make sure that you reply in the comments below, and I'll be more than happy to answer all your questions. And if you guys like this video, make sure to subscribe and I'll see you guys at the next one.